Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hoping that you had a splendid weekend and that you remembered to put cream on. This seems to be an increasingly crucial observation at this curious position in global warming. We will begin today with a conversation about Justine Greening, a phrase I have to be honest with you, I never thought I'd utter. About 4 minutes after 10 on a Monday morning, but she appears to be the first of the big-ish beasts, former cabinet level, so I think big-ish works, to call publicly for a second referendum. I'm beginning to run out of things to say. Not things to say about Brexit. You never run out of things to say. You just describe the reality in front of you. But I am beginning to run out of... what are those things called that you open oysters with? Oyster shuckers. I'm beginning to run out of oyster shuckers. I don't know. You're the oyster. We might find a pearl. We occasionally find the odd pearl. But it's my job to bring along the blade with which we prise open the oyster. I'm feeling a bit bladeless this morning. I'd quite like to ask you what you think's going to happen next, but that way, arguably, madness lies. She's called for a three-way vote, which, at first glance, and listen, I think we can hopefully have a slightly friendlier conversation about Brexit today. It means we won't go viral, because no one will come on air unaware of the fact that their trousers are around their ankles already. But of course, then they offer up their peachy little buttocks for a sound spanking from me. But I think if you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg and Peter Mandelson both describing the so-called Chequers deal in the most negative of terms, anybody, I think, and this is, again, one of those things that I kind of want to be wrong about, but all of the intelligent analysis, and my God, there's so much unintelligent analysis, and seeing it on the front page of a newspaper like The Telegraph is breathtaking for me, to see, simply provable nonsense. But anyway, I hope I'm wrong, but I think that the Chequers deal is the beginning of a negotiation with the European Union. So it's not really a take it or leave it. It is an opening gambit of it's cherry picking on Peter Rabbit style proportions, and the European Union will come back and say, well, you can't do that, and that. It makes, I think, no deal more likely, oddly. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you what I think rather than what I hope. That's what I always do on the programme, as you know. I think that some people who perhaps are so brutalised now by Brexit, people who actually know of what they speak, are so fearful of the World Trade Organization backstop, falling into that absolute chaos and damage. Even the people that think it's a good idea admit that it would involve the end of British manufacturing and agriculture as we know it. I'll say that again because some people's skulls still seem to be too thick to absorb the simplest of truths. Even the, quotes, economists, end quotes, that the Rees-Mogg forelock-tugging brand of hard Brexiters espouse, even the economists they go to and quote and cite as their experts, they acknowledge that hard Brexit or WTO rules will kill off agriculture and industry in this country. It's a fascinating quote as well today from the bloke who's kind of a New Zealander, who's kind of the chief negotiator, as it were, the Crawford Falconer. He's the chief negotiator of the trade deals that will be along shortly. This is really interesting because he's saying that in 10 years people will look back and say, oh, what were we so negative about? Which, again, I would have liked to have seen on the side of a bus. In 10 years' time, things might be better. Or in 10 years' time, things might be okay. Vote Brexit for a decade of uncertainty and damage, at the end of which we might be okay. All right, thanks, mate. His name is Crawford Falconer. And he says, and this is the bloke in charge of the trade deals. That's what's really interesting about it. The world is the UK's oyster. What is it about oysters today? How bizarre. The world is the UK's oyster. We produce the best professional services in the world. Our banks are the best in the world. Our insurance companies are the most reliable. Our architects, our designers, our artists, our lawyers, our accountants, they are all world class. We have intellectual property rights to die for. It is these services that the fastest growing economies in Asia and Africa crave. Now, just to pause for a moment, to point out that's not really going to be very comforting to people who felt that their vote was a vote against the system and against inequality. You know, people who felt that they weren't being paid enough, or they weren't valued enough, or that their jobs were increasingly demeaning. People who felt that they were in the system and losing. You now have the trade negotiator, the chief trade negotiator, saying today it's going to be the. Well, look, I tell you what, this is. I've just realised. I should do a little bit of prep before I come on air, but I've been too busy listening to Theo Osherwood's, the latest chapter of Theo Osherwood's autobiography, which we'll be sharing with you shortly. This is the metropolitan elite. Oh my days! Have we got a sound effect yet for a penny dropping? Did we ever get hold of? I just want a sort of ding. This is incredible. So this isn't what we're supposed to be talking about today, but I've just clocked something. This is Crawford Falconer, who serves as the second permanent secretary at the Department for International Trade. This is a man, I think, and you can pick me up on this if you want. He's a former New Zealand ambassador and permanent representative to the World Trade Organization. He effectively today says Brexit will be great in 10 years because the metropolitan elites will be doing great. How many people voted for that? How many people voted for the metropolitan elites to come out of the whole thing after a decade of uncertainty and damage better off than they went into it? You correct me if I'm wrong. The world is the UK's oyster. We produce the best professional services in the world. Professional services? What about ordinary working people? What about folk? Professional services? That's metropolitan elite, right? Well, I don't know. Let's see what he puts on the list. The world is the UK's oyster. We produce the best professional services in the world. Our banks are the best in the world. Vote Brexit to make banks. Hey? Our insurance companies are... Insurance companies? Banks and insurance companies? Metropolitan elites? Architects? Oh, my God. Metropolitan elites with pencils? Artists? Architects? So banks, insurance companies, architects, designers in their multicoloured spectacles and their trousers that reach their ankles, they're flipping pedal push. Designers, I didn't vote Brexit to make life better for designers. They're not just metropolitan elites, they're metropolitan liberal elites. I've never met a right-wing designer in my life. So we've got banks, insurance. This isn't me, right? Don't get cross with me. This is the chief negotiator who thinks it's going to be a good idea. Who for, Mr. Crawford? Actually, that's his Christian name. Who for, Mr. Falconer? I don't know why. I've always had a problem with people who've got two surnames instead of a Christian name. Crawford Falconer. Crawford Falconer, Falconer Crawford. Anyway, banks, great news for banks. Insurance companies, great news for insurance companies. Architects. Designers. And I quote again, Mr. Crawford Falconer, or Mr. Falconer Crawford, depending on which end of the telescope you are looking through. He even adds, our artists, actual artists. I was like, when I started taking the mickey out of designers for having multicoloured spectacle frames and trousers that end just above their ankles, I was actually conflating architecture with art. But actual artists are going to do well. Is there anything more metropolitan liberal elite than art? Artists, architects, designers, bankers and insurance companies. This is actually the curse of being an informed liberal, in that I think I'll be fine. I genuinely do. Arguably, because I've got a few quid, I might end up winning out of it. I could possibly buy your house if you voted for Brexit and turn it into a storage unit for all of my liberal tears. I'm going to start storing them in vats. So, because I belong to the metropolitan elite. So, I got mates that are architects. I got mates that are designers. I got mates that are lawyers, because lawyers are on the list as well. This is the great roll call of sturdy working class folk that the chief negotiator says today are going to do well out of Brexit. Architects, designers, artists, lawyers, accountants, bankers, insurance executives and people who work in the field of intellectual property rights. That's it, guys. And this is the curse of being an informed liberal, is that we know this. We know that the idea of turning Britain, if they succeed, into a sort of service, but even more of a service-based economy, so that all the car plants shut, the steelworks shut, everything shuts, and we simply sell the fruits of metropolitan elitism to the rest of the world. I mean, how the hell is that going to play out among all the people who thought that they were voting for fish? We've voted banks. This is not my list. This is Crawford Falconer. It's 10:13. I should probably decide what we're going to talk about today, but this has really hit me between the old eyeballs. Crawford Falconer, in 10 years, maybe even quicker. 10 years. Oh, mate. People will look back and say, oh, why were we so negative about our future? Well, I mean, for me, mate, the answer to that question would be, if the future is good news for architects, designers, artists, lawyers, accountants, bankers, insurance companies and intellectual property rights experts, I'm fine with that. You know, that these are my people. Metropolitan liberal elites, it looks like, according to the chief trade negotiator in Liam Fox's department, we're all going to be absolutely fine. Seriously, crack open the Prosecco, people. We are laughing. Who's suffering? Well, according to the economists that Jacob Rees-Mogg likes, agriculture and industry are going down the Kazi. Oh, man. So, anyway, we weren't supposed to be talking about that, although I suspect that we will. We're supposed to be talking about Justine Greening's proposal, which I agree with, but I don't know how you're going to do it, and I don't know if it will work, and I certainly don't think that the Remain answer is guaranteed, as a lot of people who are perhaps inhabiting echo chambers on the metropolitan liberal elite side of the argument. You know what metropolitan liberal elites are. They're all the people that are going to do well out of Brexit in 10 years' time, according to the guy that's in charge of our trade negotiations. But I don't know how you do it. So here's what she's proposed, and my question, your start of a 10 this morning, will simply be, what do you think of this? Okay? I'll put one statistic in front of you. I won't at this point, because Beth's been away and I don't know what tapes we've got prepared, but I won't at this point bombard you with evidence of the hypocrisy and the lies that you've been told by Brexit campaigners and remind you of all the ones that said we could be like Norway or we could be like Switzerland or that only an idiot would suggest leaving the single market, all of that. All I will tell you is that according to the most or the only available polling, only 22% of people who actually voted to leave the European Union thought that membership of the single market might be at risk. Everybody else believed that they needed us more than we needed them. So any attempts now to retrospectively reverse engineer the Brexit vote as being in favour of crashing out without a deal, that's the biggest lie of all. That's the biggest lie so far. And that's why you need another referendum. You need for people... We've done the survey. A lot of people, if you really must go for these crass, utterly fatuous analogies, like the one buying a house, where you wouldn't buy a house without having a bit of a haggle. Yeah, you wouldn't buy a house after burning your own house down and having nowhere to go in the event of the vendor of the new house not playing ball. But let's pretend that that house selling analogy has some credibility to it. Would you crack on without doing a survey, or would you reserve the right to change your mind after you've done a survey? We've done a survey now. The government has done surveys. The European Union has done surveys. We've had, call them impact assessments, call them whatever you will. We've got surveys coming out of our ears. They're all bad. Here's a survey from the bloke in charge of trade negotiations. He says, well, give it a decade and we might have some good news for metropolitan liberal elites. Everyone else is screwed. That's the survey. That, for me, is why I think we need another referendum, but I don't know how you're going to do it. 0345 6060973. So you have no deal, which they will try now. Now that we know how much money was made out of shorting the pound on the night of the referendum, all bets are off for me in terms of what a few very, very, very greedy plutocrats will do. They will wipe their backsides with your children's futures, these people. They just will. They've always been in society, kept them at bay since the end of the Second World War, but they're back with a vengeance now, okay? That's the no-deal option. Wiping their backsides with your children's futures. And they'll do it because there's a few quid in it short term. Option 2, call the whole thing off. Stay in, get properly involved, start sending our brightest and best to Brussels instead of despicable fag packet fascists and jokers. Number 3, crack on with what? The thing that Theresa May is trying to sell, but which has already been pulled apart by everybody from, and the political spectrum doesn't get much broader than this, Peter Mandelson to Jacob Rees-Mogg. And that's where we are. Still not quite sure how or why we're doing this. But the question now becomes, what happens next? Second referendum, given that the politicians have messed it up, it's time to go back to the people. 0345 6060973. And if you were going to do a second referendum, do you have a plan that looks better than Justine Greening's? I'm pretty sure we will have by 11 o'clock.
Theresa May's Brexit plans are being challenged again today, this time by the former Education Secretary, Justine Greening. The Conservative MP who voted Remain says the government's current approach is the worst of all worlds. It comes ahead of a crucial vote on the strategy in Parliament this week. Justine Greening explained she would vote against the Prime Minister's current Brexit plan.
I don't think it's possible for me to support it because in the end, it's the worst of all worlds. I think if you're a Remainer, you're looking at it thinking, well, if we have to take all the rules, why not just be sat around the table influencing them? But equally, I think if you're a Leaver, people voted for a proper clean break from the European Union, and this doesn't deliver that.
But doesn't it
so
reflect...
whichever way you look at it, I don't think it's a workable proposition.
Doesn't the plan reflect how absolutely difficult this is, and perhaps this is the most realistic plan that Mrs May can deliver?
I think the problem is that Parliament will vote against it. I think that Parliament will also vote against a no-deal scenario, and effectively what I'm saying is Parliament's stalemated and it's gridlocked. We've reached an impasse, and I think whatever the option on the table, Parliament will vote it down. That's why the only way through this now is to take that decision away from the hands of politicians and put it back into the hands of the public for them to be able to decide.
And what question would you ask people?
I think they need to be given a choice between the three options that in practice are on the table, which is either a hard or a soft Brexit, or of course staying in the EU. And I'm saying the way you do that is by allowing people two votes. They can vote for their best option that they prefer, but also for the second best. The one, if they don't get the top one, what's the one that they would have after that? It's how we elect mayors around the country, so it's perfectly possible. But I do think it gives us a better chance of finding some kind of a consensus on a route forward on Brexit, which is what we now need.
By including the option of remaining in the EU, your suggestion gives the people the option then of overturning the Brexit vote of just 2 years ago.
Well, we live in a democracy, obviously, and people will be able to have their say in this referendum. What I'm saying is that I just don't think it's right anyway, that even if we had a free vote in Parliament and I had to choose where I put my vote, I know I'd be disenfranchising a lot of people in my local community. I'd probably be voting for some sort of Remain approach, but that would really disenfranchise Leave voters in my community, many of which have been in touch with me saying that they think this deal is absolutely not what they wanted when they voted Leave. I don't think it's acceptable that I should disenfranchise those voters. They should be able to have their say. Britain should be able to decide if it wants a clean break from Brexit. I have a lot of sympathy for my Leave MP colleagues who say this doesn't deliver that clean break. And I think they should be able to have a route through to delivering that for the country. But it's clear to me that Parliament won't support it. So the only other way through then is to put that decision back into the hands of the British people.
You say the only other way is to put it in the hands of the British people through a referendum. Of course, it's not the only way. Mrs May could break the parliamentary impasse by putting the deal to the people through a general election. Why not choose that idea?
Because that's part of the problem, is that the way that Westminster works is on party politics lines. Of course, Brexit is above party politics. And so, in a way, you've got this manual that knows how to drive a car, which is Westminster, having to deal with something that's a totally different form of transport, a plane, whatever. And so that's why having a party political general election is also not the way to fix this. What you have to do is give people the clear options, recognise Parliament's in a stalemate, it's gridlocked, it's reached an impasse, and then ask people what they want.
Or give someone else a chance, some people will say who are watching right now. If people voted for a clean break, and does that mean Britain crashes out without a deal? What sort of damage would that cause to the economy across Britain and across Europe?
I think it would be damaging to the economy, but at the end of the day, if people prioritise having a clean break from the European Union, then they should be able to have that direction ahead of them. At the moment, I don't think in practice that is there with the Prime Minister's deal. And so in my view is you're probably in or you're out. But what you can't be is one foot in either camp. I think that won't work. I think the first time we need to update this common rule book, I think Parliament will probably vote it down or have huge debates around that. And it just doesn't seem like a pragmatic, sensible way of going forward, and it feels very fragile. And what Britain needs is to have a clear direction, to be able to draw a line under that, get on with it, and then get on to the other big debates facing our country, which are things I'm campaigning on, like social mobility, housing, social care, and how we look after vulnerable people in our society. I feel like all of that cannot be got onto. We cannot have the proper debates Britain needs for what kind of country we want to be in the 21st century until we've resolved the Brexit question. And that's why you have to put that back to the people to be able to get a direction, draw a line under it, and then to be able to get on to the rest of the challenges facing our country.
Let me ask you this. The Brexiteers in your party, in the Conservative Party now, seem to resemble a party within a party. Should they now go their own way, split from the Conservatives and form their own new political party?
I hope not, because I think at the end of the day we all have to recognise that Brexit isn't about party politics, and that's why it's put not only a strain on my own party, but a strain, of course, on the Labour Party as well. We've got a party political system in Westminster that simply has proved unable to deal with such a big non-party political issue, Brexit.
Okay,
saying you fix that by having a vote, that gives you a clear direction, and then I hope that actually politics again can start delivering for people on these big other issues that face our country.
What about the EU giving Britain more time?
I don't think it's about having more time, Victoria. I think we've had a lot of time. I think we've had 2 years. I think people have seen a parliament that's been unable to make progress. That's why they now need to have that decision put back in their hands. What we need is a clear direction, a clear decision.
Dawn emailed, please will the government get on with it? I voted to leave and I knew exactly what I was voting for, despite the politicians moving the goalposts. We're Great Britain and we're perfectly able to go it alone. The EU needs us and we need to go in hard if we can secure a deal. And if we don't, then let's walk away and get on with it. No messing, just get on with it. Nick says, Justine Greening giving 2 different options for leave and only 1 for Remain in a second referendum is designed to split the leave vote to ensure Remain wins. Do they think we are stupid? Bill on Facebook, how many referendums before Remoaners get their way? We're going to talk to a colleague of Justine Greening's, a Conservative MP called John Penrose, in just a moment or two. He absolutely disagrees with what she is suggesting today. In the meantime, let's talk to Norman again, because the ex-Brexit Secretary, David Davis, has been speaking this morning.
He has, and what we're beginning to see, I think, is that Mrs May's Brexit plan really has very few friends at Westminster, not just Justine Greening now saying it's never going to get through Parliament. We already know the Brexiteers have pretty much said the same, that there's no way this is going to fly. And this morning we heard, as you say, from David Davis on his way to work as a backbencher being pressed about what he was going to do this afternoon in the Commons. Just have a listen to him.
I've got 2 bills to debate today and tomorrow, and I should be doing my new job of being an ordinary backbencher.
And are you going to say anything to the House when you make a resignation speech?
No. My name's not Geoffrey Howe.
And do you think that the Prime Minister can survive another week?
Of course. She's a good Prime Minister. The fact we have a difference of opinion doesn't change that.
And I presume the way you'll be voting today goes without saying?
I'll be supporting the government on the bill and on the customs union elements where there's a challenge to them. But I'll also probably support one of the amendments on ensuring that Northern Ireland is not separated from Great Britain, which is in any event government policy, but would do no harm putting it into the bill.
Do you regret resigning?
No, not for a moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Mrs May facing a potential revolt, a sort of show of strength by Tory Brexiteers tonight. However, let me tell you, there are signs that the government is about to back off from a clash with its Brexiteers. We're hearing that they may accept these amendments tabled by Tory Brexiteers to the customs plan because of their fear that maybe the Brexiteers could get together with Labour and actually defeat the legislation. That, I imagine, is going to incense many Remainers within the Conservative Party who will say, well, look, here's the Tory Brexiteers, the first sign of them getting tough with May, and Mrs May crumbles and backs off. It gives you a sense of just how fragile relations now are in the Tory party, and it kind of underlines why Justine Greening is suggesting maybe there's got to be another referendum, because otherwise there are all the signs that the Tory party is facing at the very least an absolutely devastating internal clash and maybe even splitting.
Right. I'm just going to explain the noises of a little girl called Hannah, who we'll be talking to in a moment. That's, if you can hear some crying and screaming, it's not because of the way you're broadcasting, Norman, this morning. It's just because she's not used to the studio.
I don't take it personally. I'm okay with that.
No, you don't. Can you? I want you to explain for our younger viewers who want to learn more the reference that David Davis made to Geoffrey Howe, please.
So Geoffrey Howe is the man who began the sort of catalogue of events that led to the fall of Mrs Thatcher, because he went into the Commons after resigning from the cabinet and gave a speech which basically signalled to all the other Tory MPs that he, who'd been alongside Mrs Thatcher through all her years in government, no longer had faith in her. And he talked about being sent to bat at the crease, and Mrs May, Freudian slip, Mrs Thatcher sending him in with a broken cricket bat. And you heard David Davis there saying, I'm no Geoffrey Howe, meaning he is not going to make that sort of resignation statement. But we await Boris Johnson. Could he make a Geoffrey Howe resignation statement? We're told it's not going to be today, but who knows? Maybe later in the week.
Thank you very much, Norman.
It's a dodgy one, this Justine Greening's proposal, because it demands a second preference. So quite a few of you have already pointed out, because I just went off on a slightly unexpected tangent about the metropolitan Liberal elites being the only ones that are going to benefit from Brexit, according to the country's chief trade negotiator. Oh, crikey. Does anybody ever listen? Or do you have to wait until it happens before you realise I was right? 10 years in this occasion. Seriously, I can't sit here for 10 years saying I told you so, can I? Oh. Anyway, the point is this. You need to put a second preference. So you've got the Chequers deal, you've got suicide, the WTO option, national suicide, or you've got status quo, stay where we are now. And if everyone has to put a second option, everybody's second option is going to be the Chequers deal. So the chances are that you'll have a hamstrung first option. No one's going to put remain as their first choice and chop our legs off as their second choice. And no one who puts chop both our legs off as their first choice is going to put remain in the European Union with two legs as their second choice. So all the second choices will be the so-called Chequers deal, which is not even the Chequers deal, because by the time it's been put through the mangle of the European Union, it will not bear any resemblance at all to what it looks like now. And what it looks like now has got everybody united in agreeing that it's awful. Literally everybody. Nobody likes it. The two questions I need answering are, it's one of those days where I don't need to take calls, isn't it? I've got so much to get out. This often happens on Mondays. What I really want to know from the Brexiters is, if we didn't have any powers, how can we now be saying that the Chequers deal involves us giving up all our powers? 0345 6060 973. Cliff's in Amersham. Cliff, what do you think?
Good morning, James. Yeah, Justine Greening. It's an interesting concept, but I don't think it's going to work somehow, because there could potentially be a three-way split. Would that be a humongous headache?
Not with a second preference, I don't think. That's what undoes I mean, I'm not here to defend it, but that takes away slightly the chance of a genuinely three-way split, because in the case of a genuinely three-way split, you count the second preferences, and then that gives you a clear winner.
I think the second preference it's got to work, hasn't it? Because the Conservatives started this ball rolling. They've got to at least wait to the end, surely. I mean, either that, or you go for a leadership battle again, something like. I don't think there's time for a referendum or even a general election. I don't think there's got time.
Well, there is. I mean, there is theoretically time. There's space in the calendar for it, but it's got to be preferable to. I mean, what the hell are we going to end up with if we don't actually have another think now we've seen the survey?
One thing's for sure, we need to do some sort of deal with you. That's a must. Whatever.
And even Donald Trump appeared to say that, although, of course, 24 hours later he might well say the opposite. But he said she can't walk away.
I'm not a Trump fan, but I mean,
no, there's no but after that sentence, Cliff. You need to rephrase it. It's like saying I'm not a racist, but I'm not a Trump fan, but there's no but. So you can tell me what you think, but there's no but. If you're a Trump fan, if there's a but after saying I'm not a Trump fan, you're normalising fascism. And I appreciate in the context of where I'm sitting now, that's a little bit pot kettle black, but we are where we are.
Sorry.
Carry on.
Some things that Trump says make sense.
Fair enough, yes. And then he says the polar opposite 24 hours later, but I'll let your original point stand.
Yeah, but the thing with Theresa May, I mean, I think she voted Remain. So you've got someone in lead of the country, if you like. It's almost like being a vegan teetotaler that has a G&T in his spare time with a McDonald's. They're not following what they,
No, I disagree with you on that as well. And this, you're putting me in a horrible situation now where I have to kind of defend Theresa May, but she sees it as her duty to see Brexit through.
Yeah, I agree, because she's a professional person. She has a job to do. This is why I say to her, the second option is probably the best option, because she's trying to get us out of this, and I think she will eventually get us out of it. But the Brexiteers have got time constraints.
No, I don't think she's trying to stop Brexit. I think she's trying to get it through at all costs, however awful it is. This is what the will of the people means.
I think we should. Yeah, sorry. I think we should give her the time. That's what I think. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. At what point could you imagine it being necessary to go back to the people? So when we've got the final post-Chequers negotiation, we've got the very final survey. I'm going to stick with that. I'm pleased with that analogy until someone picks it apart. But here is the absolute survey. Everyone agrees on it. This is the state of the deal. Then surely you and me deserve to have another.
Yeah, you could be right there. I mean, it'll be before Christmas, won't it? It's got to be.
Yeah.
It's got to be before Christmas.
Before Christmas, and then you've got until March to have a little bit of a rethink. And I mean, there's some debate over whether we could just revoke unilaterally Article 50, but Lord Kerr, who wrote it, tells me that we could, and I know it's desperately unfashionable, but that's the kind of expertise that I normally tug my forelock to. Cliff, thank you. Guy is in Stoke-on-Trent. Guy, what do you think?
James, I'm basing my response on the knowledge that the voters have now on Brexit. It must be, 100% more than what...
Do you think so? I'm glad you've rung from Stoke, because I sometimes worry that it's a kind of it's a London media obsession, and although we all now know lots more about it, does it really play outside the bubble? Does it play outside the beltway? Are people taking on board the lessons that the rest of us are learning?
Well, it's national news now that the North East is going to be diminished.
Project Fear, mate.
Well, but it may be, but it's national news, and now I think people in the North East, it's resonating, and they're starting to consider it.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. Not just the North East as well, but there's automotive industry near you in the Midlands.
Yeah,
potteries.
Yes. I picked the North East because that's the one which is getting the most exposure.
Yes.
But my proposal...
Go on.
...is go with Miss Greening. We have 3 options on the ballot paper. Let's make it simple. We have the hard option. Sorry, we have a hard Brexit.
Yeah.
Hard Brexit. That satisfies Boris and Farage.
Yes.
Then we have the soft Brexit, which is what the Cabinet are working towards.
But which nobody actually wants.
In that case, it would show in the ballot.
Possibly.
And we have option 3, which is we remain where we are. And the reason I've discriminated between hard and soft Brexit is because they themselves are arguing amongst themselves which is which. And I just think we spent enough time debating it, arguing about it, looking at it, flying across the continent.
Yeah, but if we have another vote, mate, then the arguments and the conversations are going to magnify and increase. They're not going to be diminishing, are they? What do you think about today's development? This fella who he comes from that Legatum Institute that seems to have been exerting undue influence over all aspects of hard Brexit lobbying, but he's now the chief trade negotiator, saying that these are the companies that will do well, possibly after 10 years. Banks, insurance, architects, designers, artists, lawyers, accountants, intellectual property rights experts.
Well, my sister works in Canary Wharf, and she tells me that the financial institutions are making plans to leave the City of London. So straight away, I'm not sure what he means about the banks. We've got Santander, which is busily buying up financial corporations in the UK. That's a Spanish corporation. And I think there's a lot of arrogance there. I mean, I've just spent 2 weeks in Spain, and are we really arguing that our architects are that much more talented than Spanish architects?
Yes. What?
Are they? Are our architects?
Who was that in the background, Guy?
That was my partner.
What does she have to say?
1 minute, please. This is Maureen. She's got some ideas.
Okay.
I understand a bit They had a Spanish architect who designed the Scottish Parliament buildings, didn't they?
See, this is what we need. We need more Maureen's involved and fewer David Davises. So, well, are you not encouraged by the fact that artists and architects and designers and artists, this is what all the people, this is what the gammon voted for, more work, more jobs for the metropolitan elites?
Yeah.
Maureen, you sound like a philosopher. I shall leave you and Guy to your contemplations as I head towards the news. Thank you. From Stoke-on-Trent, 03456 606 0973 is the number that you need. I feel that we have to have another referendum, but I feel that partly because I know so much more now than I did then, but also because I am even more persuaded that leaving would be a disaster and that another referendum at least offers an opportunity to slam the brakes on. I don't understand the logic that says don't trust the people to make a more informed decision than last time. And I don't really think you can argue with that. Nobody can possibly claim to be less informed now that they've read the survey, or at least bits of the survey, than they were before. But anyway, the phone lines are open. Hit the numbers now. You should get through. It's 10:30. So it's sort of yet another timely illustration of just how mad everything is. I'm not suggesting that this fella's right. He is the chief trade negotiator in Liam Fox's department, but I'm not suggesting he's right when he says that our architects, our designers, our artists, our lawyers, our accountants, our intellectual property rights experts, our banks and our insurance companies will be the ones that benefit from Brexit after 10 years of uncertainty and damage. I'm just telling you that that's what he said. So, I mean, obviously I'm grateful to everybody for sending me, including the Constructor UK, a reminder of what Norman Foster's architecture outfit said last month, which was that they'll probably leave the country. I'm not suggesting the fella's right. I'm just telling anybody who still labours under the illusion that they're up to anything but no good, that even the people who still claim it's going to be a good idea after 10 years of bad are suggesting that all the goodness will go to the Metropolitan Liberal elites, which I don't think anybody voted for, not even the Metropolitan Liberal elites. And that is the Metropolitan Liberal elite curse. It's not really us that we're worried about. Obviously, it's the fabric of the nation. But if you've got transferable skills, even after abolishing freedom of movement, you're probably going to be okay. If you're, if you do manual labour, or if you're on an industrial process, if you're working in the construction of things or the delivery of things, physical goods, you're the ones that are going to get absolutely kebabbed. And oddly, demographically, you're the ones that voted for it. While people like me, futilely and impotently, sat on the sidelines saying, you should probably think that through. So now that we know, now that we've seen the survey, why on earth would you not give yourself the chance to pull out of the deal? And then nobody buys a house without a survey, except those people who somehow end up owning the houses whose garden disappears by 6 feet every summer as the cliff collapses at the bottom of the road. I mean, nobody buys a house without a survey, right? Now we've seen the survey. Justin Greening suggests we should have a bit of a rethink. What's not to like? Jason's in Sutton. Jason, what do you think?
Hi, James. I've got 3 quick points. Thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
3 points.
Yes.
Firstly, Justine Greening is absolutely right. We have to put this vote to the people, and it should only have 2 options, especially if she's wrong. The reason it has to go back to the people is because our representatives in the House of Commons are incompetent, irresponsible, and they're voting for political gain. Let me explain what I mean.
Yes.
These 57 impact studies that didn't exist and did exist have been published in a room in the House of Commons library, and MPs have to sign in and sign out.
I know.
94% of our members of Parliament have not bothered. Just 6% have actually bothered to read the impact of the things that they're actually voting on. I find that incredible.
And yet not.
I checked it with my member of Parliament, Paul Scully. He's for Sutton and Sheen. He's the Vice Chair of the Conservative Party, and he, thankfully, was one of the 6%. But it does beg the question, if you've actually read those impact studies, why on earth would you continue down this road?
Well, answer the question, then.
Well, let me get to my second. The second point is there is no soft Brexit. The Chequers deal was dead on departure, never mind on arrival in Europe. It was dead before it even came out of the Chequers building. There is only 2 options: remain in the EU or leave the EU on the hardest possible Brexit. Why is it the hardest possible? Because everyone's talking about these WTO trade rules that we can negotiate new free trade deals under, et cetera, et cetera. One of those WTO rules says you have to control the goods coming in and out of your country.
Customs.
That means a hard border and customs on the island of Ireland and around Gibraltar, for starters. Now, if we're going to put a hard border in Ireland,
bear in mind the EU withdrawal agreement that's just received royal assent, Section 10 of that specifically says it would be illegal of this government to do anything that creates a hard border on the island of Ireland. So we cannot negotiate all these new free trade agreements around the world unless we have that hard border. Having the hard border is illegal under UK sovereign parliamentary law.
Yes.
It's just unbelievable that they're carrying on with all of this.
No, hang on. Oh, go on then. Third point.
My third point is Leave won the first campaign on a pack of lies. Everybody knows that now. They won it on short, sharp sound bites. And the sound bites...
Wouldn't they work again?
Well, that was the question I was going to ask Steve Bannon yesterday, but Nigel Farage won't take my calls anymore.
Oh.
I was going to ask, because he's a winning campaign strategist, and my question to him was, look, when we have this second referendum, which is now inevitable, should Nigel Farage tell the same pack of lies he told last time, or should he tell a whole pack of new lies this time around?
Yes. I wouldn't ordinarily be comfortable with you accusing somebody who works here of telling a pack of lies, but in his case, I'm perfectly happy to make an exception.
Okay. Well, the rallying call of the Remain campaign in this next referendum should be, come on then, prove it.
Yeah, but I mean, you know that Farage was one of the people that said we could be like Norway or Switzerland. I mean, literally out loud on tape. But it's like Donald Trump saying fake news after the Sun have played tapes of him talking, isn't it? I mean, it is literally just say one thing, say the complete opposite, hold the public in such complete contempt that they won't know whether it's Monday or Tuesday, and then you can pick their pockets while they're trying to work it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Dozens and dozens and dozens of times on Question Time, on Sunday Politics, Daily Politics, on his show, you name it. He's been telling everybody, what's so bad about Norway and Switzerland? They're rich, they're happy. And then now, when the Norway option is proposed by the government, he's saying, well, actually, I know I told you all to vote for this option, but that's not what you voted for, is it? I know I told you to vote for that.
Yeah, but they'll deny it. But people deny it. I mean, this is the astonishing 2020 revisionism, isn't it, where people now say that they did vote. I mean, I've taken calls off people telling me that they did vote to be poorer. I've taken calls off people telling me that they did vote for their own children to lose their jobs, that it would somehow in the long run be worth it because we'd get back all these powers from Brussels. And then they go to Chequers, and the complaints that the same people have about the Chequers deal is that we'd be giving up all our powers to Brussels. The powers that we don't currently have because Brussels has them, we would suffer by surrendering to Brussels in the event of the Chequers deal going through. And I say all those things out loud, and most people, but by no means all, will see, as you do, that they are utterly clear and utterly penetrable positions. And yet some people still, and these are the people that we don't understand. These are the people that, I guess, are the ones that people like Steve Bannon appeal to. The furiously hard of thinking. The people who are given 2 apples and 2 oranges and asked to tell us how many pieces of fruit they have, and they reply 7. I don't know, what do you do with those people?
I'd pass, but thankfully they are no more than 1 in 5 in the country. Not all Brexiteers are stupid.
No, well, crikey, I'm not suggesting for a minute that they are, although now, to still be in favour of this, we might need a new word.
Well, that's the difference between ignorance and stupidity. We were all ignorant a few years ago.
Yes.
But once you have the opportunity to educate yourself or be educated and the facts are put on the table, if you choose to ignore those facts, you can no longer claim to be ignorant.
And you
can only claim to be stupid.
Yes, I shall probably borrow that analysis if it's all right with you, Jason. Thank you. 10:42 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need. Jason is better informed than I am, I think. I've got no reason to doubt what he said about leaving the EU. The Act makes it illegal to create a hard border in Ireland, so under WTO rules we'd be breaking our own laws. But we haven't got any powers anyway, because we gave them all to Brussels. But the Chequers deal's rubbish because it would involve giving all our powers to Brussels. And still you doff your caps at these people. Still you tug your forelocks. 03456060973 is the number that you need. How would anybody, to stay with my analogy, which isn't perfect, but it's pretty good, now that we've seen the survey, or I mean, when we have finally seen the survey, when the Chequers deal has been filleted by the European Union, when we've seen the survey, should we have the right to pull out of the house sale? Or, I guess, I mean, if you hate the survey and you want to buy a hole in the ground instead, that should also be your option under the crash out with no deal. I've seen the survey. I thought I was buying a 2-storey house. Turns out it's a bungalow, so I'd like to move into the shed instead. if that's all right. That would be option 3. So option 1 would be, okay, we thought we were buying a mansion block. Turns out it's a bungalow, but we'll press on with the bungalow. That's the Chequers deal, right? Option 2, do you know what? It's a bit like that Phil and Kirsty programme that's on at the moment. It's called Love It or List It. Have you seen Love It or List It? And so what you've got people who are living in a house and they are thinking of moving, but they'd also kind of like to contemplate doing a really good upgrade job on the house they've already got. So it's Love It or List It. I only saw a bit of it last night. I quite like the banter between those two. So what's his name? Phil, Kirsty Allstop and Phil. I like him. Everyone's going to text me now. No one will text me the solution to the Brexit problem. Everyone will text me the name of the bloke that presents location. But Love It or List It. So that's what we're doing. Option 1 is, okay, we'll take the deal. We'll take the bungalow, even though we were promised a palace, right? Option 2 is, well, hang on a minute, you promised us a palace and now you're offering us a bungalow, so we, hard Brexiters, Tug Forelock, Doff Cap, we are going to move into the shed at the bottom of next door's garden. That'll teach you. Ha ha ha! And then option 3 would be stay in, but maybe get an interior design around. Stay exactly as we are, do the status quo, but maybe stop sending flotsam and jetsam to the European Parliament. And I apologise to the fine, upstanding members of that institution who've been elected by British voters over the years, but you're not the ones whose names spring immediately to mind. The names that spring immediately to mind are fraudsters, charlatans and racists. So let's stop sending fraudsters, charlatans and racists to the European Parliament and instead treat it like part of our democratic infrastructure as opposed to a sort of weird side order. It's 10:45. Coming up at 12:30, in a slight change to the schedules, we will get the full story of how LBC's mild-mannered political editor Theo Usherwood ended up on the receiving end of a foul-mouthed tirade from Donald Trump's former strategy chief, Steve Bannon. Absolutely despicable behaviour. Talk about a snowflake. Actually, no, I shouldn't judge until I've heard the full story. But I'm sure, like me, those of us who know Theo Usherwood well would not have put him at the top of the list of people likely to invoke verbal violence from someone who's supposed to be something of a tough guy. But we'll get to the bottom of that before the end of the programme today. Bless his little cotton socks. Before that, we continue the question of why, after seeing the survey, anyone would still want to buy the house, given that the survey is almost uniformly negative. Answer, well, Brexit. A couple of you suggesting, and actually someone's done it from the point of view of having Christian in Wandsworth. My dad and older brother, who are Brexit ultras, believe that Brexit is to be a failure because of how it is being handled by the cabinet rather than because it's a doomed manoeuvre. How do you prove otherwise? You ask them what the plan would be. And this is, Christian, it's a great question. You ask them what the plan would be. You ask them why, when David Davis left, he didn't actually explain in detail what he would have done differently. You ask them why Boris Johnson now is back on his very, very generous wage for writing a column for the Daily Telegraph, owned by the men that own the Ritz, those magnificent, doughty champions of anti-elitism, the owners of the Ritz. Boris Johnson is back on the front page of the Telegraph today under the headline, "It's time to believe in our Great Britain." I sometimes say stuff to you, and I think, well, that one's probably pushing it a little bit too far. I've sort of garnered this reputation for being ahead of the curve on Brexit, but only because I read it, and it's my job. It's not your job to read this stuff. You speak to someone like Jason in Sutton, and you realise there's still big gaps in your knowledge and understanding. Or you speak to someone like Kieran, who's become somewhat laughably known as the van driver, when what he actually runs is a just-in-time logistics delivery company that sees him flying across the borders of continental Europe several times a day. And you realise that you know very, very little about what that will mean for trade on low and grand scales. But I do make these little aperçus occasionally. And one of them is, eventually there will be nothing left but belief. I think I started saying this to you about 6 months ago. Eventually it will just be belief. When I say it, I think, some of these people seem to be honourable. Maybe they'll have something more to offer. But then you turn to the front page of your father's old newspaper. That's just me. I don't imagine it's your father's old newspaper. And you see, it's time to believe in our Great Britain. Boris Johnson in rallying call for the nation to look to a brighter post-Brexit future. So, Christian, although you will probably be wasting your breath, the way you deal with your dad and your brother is just to get them to tell you what would have gone differently. How could it have been better? And if they point to the Jacob Rees-Mogg school of nonsense and obfuscation, you point out that the quotes, economists end quotes, that he relies on accept and predict the destruction of agriculture and industry in this country, leading to, one presumes, to knit two strands together, the future described by the ex-Legatum Institute second permanent secretary of the Department for International Trade. 10 years, possibly less, people who look back and say, why were you so negative? Because we produce the best professional services in the world. So even this fellow who's in charge of our trade negotiations thinks that the beneficiaries are going to be banks, insurance companies, architects, designers, artists, lawyers, accountants, and intellectual property rights experts. What? Not hard-working people who've had all their jobs nicked by immigrants who also sign on at the same time while stealing our jobs. What? Oh. Kim's in Windsor. Kim, what do you think?
I was just phoning to say about if there was a second referendum,
yes.
which I'm not massively enthusiastic about.
I don't think anyone would be.
No, I know.
It'd be like taking a dose of salts. We might not fancy it, but it's better than the alternative.
No, but yes, and it just seems that Parliament has come to such an impasse that it sort of it may well be an inevitability that we have to get on with. What we're going to, if you did have the three options, I mean, who knows whether that's actually the best thing to do.
Yes.
But if you had the three options, the leaving on WTO rules option, whoever was campaigning for that should absolutely, before the referendum, have to do some sort of white paper with detail.
Chapter and verse. And that should be all that the debate is about. None of these flipping despicable breaking point posters, none of these claims that we can have our cake and eat it or that they need us more than we need them. You just get chapter and verse, clinical detail on what it would mean, and they have to argue it.
Work and how that happens. Because, I mean, that is how we got here in the first place, was that they didn't have to do... In the Scottish referendum, they had to do... The SNP had to produce a white paper on how it was going to work. And that's arguably why they lost.
Because well, I'll tell you again, this
isn't going to work.
Yeah, I'm not as across that as you clearly are, but again, it is when you look into the... See, what Dominic Cummings said, the fellow who ran Vote Leave, the sort of eminence Grease who was lurking just off camera when Gove and Johnson turned up in front of that podium looking like rabbits caught in headlights after unexpectedly winning a referendum.
I know, exactly. I mean,
they never wanted to win.
They didn't expect to win it. They didn't think they were going to win it.
They didn't want to win it.
They didn't want to win it. No, absolutely. They thought that it was going to do that.
But he said, Cummings said all along, Tim Shipman's book's brilliant on this, Cummings said all along that the way to win is to get utterly contradictory messages out there on the same side. So two people voting to leave are voting for things that are impossible to deliver both. And as long as you don't point that out, and if anybody tries to point that out, you shout them down with Project Fear, you shoot them down with accusations of this, that and the other. So you've got 30, 40, 50 different leaves all going unchallenged by each other. And you're right, if the third option, if a second referendum is going to work, the WT option is the one that needs to be explained in excruciating detail, because I know what staying in looks like. It looks like now. And I know roughly what the deal would look like because it's written down in black and white, albeit it's going to be vastly inferior to what we've got now. If you're still going to float the boat that there's some third option that delivers unicorns by the end of the week, I want to see it. I want the unicorns rounded up and photographed. I want conclusive, incontrovertible evidence that the unicorns exist. Paul's in Tottenham. Paul, what do you think?
James, good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I think there should be a second referendum. And I think maybe there should be a fourth option added to the ballot paper.
Holy maloli.
Along with the other three.
Go on.
I think a lot of people voted Brexit because they're unhappy with the way that the EU's run.
Or the way they think the EU is run.
Well, there are certain things that the EU should change. I mean, I'll give you one brief example that, Juncker and Tusk, who actually voted for them? MPs that we voted for, they're not actually voted for by people that live within the EU. It's voted by someone else.
Yeah, so but no one votes for the Defence Secretary to be the Defence Secretary either.
Right, but then these people are in charge of this institution.
Yeah, and so your fourth option would be reform, but we don't get to do that. We can agitate for it, but we can do that already. The EU can only be reformed by democracy, by votes by member states and MEPs to change things.
I would have it on there. Remain with reform. Then
I'm just pointing out to you that it does. I mean, I kind of like it, but that fudges it even further because we can reform now. You just need to get a majority in Brussels to do whatever it is that you want to do. That's why the arguments about it not being democratic usually fall apart quite quickly, because if you want to reform the European Union, you do it in the same way that you would reform Parliament. You do it by voting.
Right.
And electing the people who will promise
vote.
to campaign for the reforms that you want.
But then I think that these people that are in power, Tusk and Juncker, the obvious two, I never knew who they were until 2016.
Yeah,
but, I would feel more comfortable if these guys actually campaigned and there was a vote for their position.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that the EU is very stubborn on, and it annoys people. And then they think, I'm anti-EU because,
Well, you don't vote for the... You don't... I mean, I hear you, and I hope you're right. I hope that a little bit more transparency in that kind of quarter might comfort people and make them see that it's not the... not the evil institution that they've been persuaded that it is. But the problem there very, very simply becomes that we don't elect the head of the civil service. There's lots of sort of very, very senior people who run things that we don't elect. If we elected... Well, I mean, why would Donald Tusk, having been elected as a result of... No, he does get elected, mate.
Not by you and me, he doesn't. I've never voted for Tusk or somebody else.
No, but you voted for the people that voted for him.
Right, but I would like to vote for him directly.
27-1 by the leaders of our countries. So you voted for Theresa May and she voted for Donald Tusk, mate.
Yeah, but I had the opportunity to vote for Theresa May. I don't get the opportunity to vote for a Donald Tusk.
No, and you don't get the opportunity to vote for the head of the civil service either. You vote for Theresa May. In fact, the civil service is a bad example because she doesn't appoint...
He's not a politician, though, is he?
The head of the civil service. No, but did you know... Hand on heart, Paul. Hand on heart. Did you know that Donald Tusk was elected by the 28 leaders of the European Council?
Yes, I did.
All right. Because it sounded like you didn't know that. You said he wasn't elected by anyone.
Well... No, that's not what I meant. I meant he's not elected. He's not elected by actual people.
Okay, and if you were choosing between, if you were choosing the next president of the European Council, what other names would you like to have seen in the frame?
I'd like them to campaign and tell me what they're going to do and how they're going to improve the EU.
You said yourself you didn't know his name until 2016, and you'd have a Polish fella, you'd have a Hungarian fella, you'd have a French fella, an Italian fella. The whole point about electing the president of the European Council is the decision is left to the people who know the score, and they're the people that are our elected leaders, the 28 leaders of the European Council countries.
Yeah, it seems that our politicians are elected.
It doesn't, mate. I learned something there as well. I'm prepared to admit that. I kind of thought he was elected, but I wasn't 100% sure. Double check while I'm talking to you. Turns out he was elected by our elected Prime Minister. So again, that idea of it's undemocratic, it needs reform. You elect the Prime Minister to make decisions in what she considers to be the best interest of the country. Or you don't. And we did. It's 11 o'clock. I think Kim in Windsor's right, isn't she? If we are to have a second referendum, a third referendum actually, if we're to have a bit of a rethink after seeing the survey, we have a little bit of a chat over a glass of wine and decide, are we actually going to crack on with the house? It turns out that that's not a swimming pool in the back garden. It's a sinkhole. Turns out it's not actually got a third floor. It's a bungalow. And the old fella that used to live there, he's left the cellar full of steam engines. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. No one's rung me yet, have they? Is anyone ringing to say they don't want another vote? Oh, the first fella didn't want another vote, actually. Why not, given that we now know nothing, or we knew nothing then and we now know more? For example, we're all on a learning curve this morning, even those of us who pretend that we're not. Donald Tusk elected by the leaders of the 28 European Union countries. Juncker is elected. It's a bit more complicated, Juncker's election, but again, going back to the last call before the news, he is elected. He's the lead candidate. Links the appointment of the Commission's president to the result of European parliamentary elections. So he's kind of the leader of the group that does best in the European parliamentary elections. I think I'm forgetting what the word is. It's something like Spitzenkandidat. But I digress. The question is simple. Justine Greening has suggested we have another referendum now that we know more. The three options she put forward are no deal, which would just be a disaster. Even the people who say that we should do it concede that it would kill off agriculture and industry. Stay as we are, but to take Paul's point from just before the news, reform. That's kind of where I am, but I don't think you need a fourth option. I think if we stay in, I hesitate to say this because it'll make me sound even more ridiculous than usual, but if I was 10 years younger, I'd think about becoming an MEP if we stayed in. Because obviously the problem is that we've been sending utter incompetence there. Or rather, we've been sending good people there, but because of our media lens being so distorting and so dedicated to rage and heat rather than light and calmness, the only people in Brussels we can name are the fraudsters, the charlatans and the racists. So why not start sending good people there and actually taking it as seriously as other countries clearly do? I don't think you need to have reform on the list, though, but because for me it's silent, it's in brackets. Of course you would reform. You'd work to change some of the things that we don't currently like. I'd probably be honest with you, I'd probably put a padlock on Jean-Claude Juncker's cocktail cabinet as well. That would be one of the first things I'd do. I don't think anyone's going to disagree about that. And that's another thing. Sorry to go on, but because I am persuaded that leaving is a disaster, some people seek to portray one as being a fan of Jean-Claude Juncker's or being supportive of every single aspect of European Union membership. It's your side that's binary, not my side. My side is nuanced, thoughtful, sophisticated, intelligent, educated, enlightened, and ready to admit that it's wrong. So I can say Juncker's not fit for purpose. If that footage I saw of him last week being essentially held up on either side, if that was linked, as seems likely, to his imbibing, then you've got a major problem that should be addressed. Too sweet. You can say that. It's so weird that the hard Brexit position is so binary that you end up having to support them whatever they say, even when they say, yeah, you'll probably lose your job. Yeah, I voted for that. You'll definitely be worse off. Yeah, I know, that's fine. It's a price worth paying for getting our powers back. Yeah, but they've just said that we've already got the powers because they're complaining about having to give them back to Brussels. Yeah, but, I believe, I've read the Telegraph, I believe Boris Johnson, what was the song? Do you believe? Boris Johnson is the political equivalent of whoever sang that. I should take a call. I'm going a bit stir crazy. Oliver's in Liverpool. Oliver, what have you got?
Hey, James, first time caller.
You're very welcome.
I'm a bit nervous. I don't understand it because when I had a company in England for 20, 30 years, I dealt with Europe, and before the border things were sorted out, it became a win-win situation. I was able to load up the van, sell the stuff in Europe and come back to British manufacturers and British wholesalers and then resell with no hassle. So
like a hot knife through butter, Oliver, that's what you were?
It was
a hot knife through butter.
No, it was good, I tell you why, because there was more time we could spend in Europe, sell more into Europe, and Britain won. It was a win-win. So why try and fix something if it's not broke is the same we have, And the other thing, if I'd known that there was going to be any hassle with the Irish border, I would have gone out and campaigned to remain. I said quite about it to my friends who are English and voted leave, some voted remain, but when we do have a conversation, at least I've got solid reasons to put down to the reasons why life experience is one.
But can I cautiously suggest you didn't think it was necessary?
Absolutely, I didn't think. And the whole one word springs to mind about this whole thing, Brexit, is illogical. It seems very illogical that the people that voted for it, there's very little immigration. That Trump should get in an immigration which has done nothing but made America rich and wealthy. So it is a bit weird if you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's totally. And the other thing is the second vote. Okay, imagine you put somebody on trial for a serious murder charge, okay?
Yeah.
You listen to prosecution, then you listen to defence, right? So the guy gets found guilty, or the person found guilty. Then we realise that the evidence that we were given was all false. Wouldn't you then ask for a real trial?
Well, you realise that several of the key prosecution witnesses were lying through their teeth.
Absolutely.
They're often dirty yellow teeth.
Whether they vote leave again or remain again, on that principle, there should be a real trial.
Yeah, but people don't want to admit it. Your courtroom analogy works in the land of logic where you and I reside, but it doesn't work in the land of promises and pledges where a lot of the Brexit voters reside. So they can't admit that they believed the liars yet because they've got so much invested emotionally in believing the lies. And so they're going to blame the people that point out the lies. If we were in the crowd and the naked emperor was walking past and we were laughing at his peachy buttocks, we'd get lynched. We'd be dangling from the nearest lamppost while the crowds are still shouting, lovely clothes, lovely clothes. And me and you, Oliver, were going, no, he's got no clothes on, he's naked, look at his little buttocks there, glinting in the wind, and they're shouting, get rid of these heretics, heretics, down with the saboteurs, crush the saboteurs. So I don't know how we get past that. That's our challenge, Oliver.
There seems to be totally no honesty in the whole thing, and if the foundation is wrong, then the house will collapse, believe me. But it's not a good foundation.
No, well, that's because you don't believe in the foundation.
No, well,
Oliver.
I have reasons.
I don't want to hear your reasons. You don't believe enough. Haven't you heard from the master builder?
Economical reasons.
I'll get your economical reasons and sticking where the sun don't shine. Boris Johnson says Britain must believe in itself after Brexit. That's how you fix the foundations. You believe. It's Sure I'm thinking of.
We believe in the Chinese and we believe in the Indians and the Americans. They will not worry about Little Britain anymore.
No, you've got a choice. You've got a choice. You've got 4 powers emerging in the world. You're absolutely right. China, India, America, the European Union, and we've got to be either an intrinsic part of one of them, or kind of like, what would it be? It's sort of not like a sidecar. It's worse than that. It's just sort of getting a toe off one of them, getting a toe while they're kind of nicking our petrol. Like that analogy's not one of my best. Oliver, I don't know what you're nervous about. You're a natural. Philip's in Burton-on-Trent. Philip, what would you like to say?
I found it really just a couple of things. One is to correct something you said earlier.
Oh, always welcome.
And I'd love to borrow your crystal ball, because you said we need to have absolutely chapter and verse, I can't remember the exact words, but you said absolutely chapter and verse. If we do leave and it's WTO, then we need that absolutely nailed down. Well, and you said, but we don't need to do that for staying, because we know what it'll be. It's exactly what it is now. Well,
the day after the vote, it will be exactly as it was the day before.
But we don't know what.
Well, that's what I meant. I've clarified it for you now. So, what was the thing you wanted to correct me about?
So, because I think it's a bit sleight of hand. Because actually, if we're going to stay, we need chapter and verse about what staying is, and what will be changing, what won't be changing in the future.
We don't know that, do we? We can agitate for it, but in terms of what happens the day after we vote, if you voted to remain, it will be the same as it was the day before. If you voted to leave, everything's up in the air.
If you vote to remain, you don't know what you're voting for, because we don't know what it's going to be like in the future.
Yes, but we'll be involved in deciding what it's like in the future.
Not necessarily.
Well, yes, necessarily.
In a sort of pseudo sort of way.
Not in a sort of pseudo sort of way. For precisely the reasons that they're now complaining, we'd be giving up our powers by going for the Chequers deal. The powers we would use to influence the future of the European Union, the powers that the hard Brexiters are complaining that they're set to lose under the Chequers deal. So what was it you wanted to correct me about?
Because when I heard you on the radio, you said that a vote for staying in is
a vote for the status quo.
But it isn't the status quo.
Of course it's the status quo, you silly sausage. It's exactly the same as things were yesterday, with the freedom to mould a new and even better future. So anyway, thanks for correcting me. Was there anything else you wanted?
Yeah, just to say that on the second referendum bit, my view is that if democracy is to mean anything in this country, then we have to implement the result, and then at a later stage, once that's been implemented, if you then want another referendum to say, do we want to rejoin, then that's how you do it.
But we won't. We'll have to rejoin with Schengen and the euro. There's no circumstances.
Yeah. But we'll end up with that anyway eventually.
No. Again, you've done it again. You see, you ring up to correct me, and then you make these. How would we end up in Schengen or the euro without voting to be in Schengen or the euro?
But that's because if you look at the way the politicians are voting now and ignoring democracy, they will go with what the EU wants.
So how are the politicians voting now to ignore democracy?
Because they are trying to thwart, and they're trying to stop having a clean Brexit.
Thwart. Okay, simple question for you, Philip. Right, here are 3 people. Okay, one of them believed the Brexit campaigner who said we could be like Norway. One of them believed the Brexit campaigner who said that only an idiot would think of leaving the single market, and one of them believed the Brexit campaigner who said freedom of movement wouldn't be threatened in any way, shape or form. They all voted leave. None of them are getting what they voted for. So how is that democracy?
No, we should be getting what was promised.
Yes, but they were promised that we could be like Norway, and then him standing next to him was promised that freedom of movement would stay, and then him over there was promised there was no chance whatsoever that we were leaving the single market. They all voted leave. They all voted leave. How was that democracy?
But I wasn't promised that. I was promised that we would leave the EU.
Yes, but you voted, these 3 people voted to leave the EU because they believed freedom of movement would remain, that we would stay in the single market, and we could be like Norway. So they're not getting anything that they voted for. How is that democracy?
I don't remember any of that. Sorry, I wasn't told. People might have given opinions, but we weren't told if we voted we'd get the Norway solution. We're saying that.
What is wrong with Norway? What is wrong with Switzerland? We were told repeatedly that we could be like them. I know people. I speak to them. They ring the programme. They voted to leave the European Union because they believed that there was no chance of leaving the single market. They believed that we could be like Norway. They believed that freedom of movement wouldn't be affected. That's why they voted. How is that democracy? Because they're not getting any of it.
I'm sorry. I don't understand.
You can say that again. So clarify a couple of things from earlier on the issue of how people are elected. Tusk and Juncker being the examples offered up by the caller. Tusk is the president of the European Commission is elected by the European Council. That's the bottom line, is that the 28 leaders of member states have a straight fight. The winner takes all. So Tusk is elected by our leaders. Juncker is elected by MEPs. So the bottom line there is, again, it's arguably more democratic than some of our domestic institutions are. I did swat up on this immediately after the referendum result. I apologise for the gazillionth time for not being more clued up before. I think we all got a bit gaslit by the sort of Boris Johnson school of journalism. I kind of thought, yeah, it's a bit rubbish, probably better off in it. I had no idea about all of the, that analogy that we coined in the days immediately after the referendum. Getting out is going to be like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake. I had no idea about a lot of this stuff before votes were cast. I knew more than a lot of people, but nowhere near as much as I do now. And I think that probably describes all of us, doesn't it? Everyone knows more now than they did then. But the Juncker thing is interesting because it's worth reminding ourselves what happens in domestic politics. Theresa May is not elected by MPs. Jean-Claude Juncker is elected by MEPs. She's the Prime Minister because she's the leader of the majority, sort of, party in Parliament. So you could easily argue that Juncker's position is more democratic than Theresa May. Also, when ministers, members of the Commission are being appointed, they're all interviewed. There's all sorts of scrutiny of their backgrounds and what have you. And that means that MEPs effectively can veto the appointment of, or overrule, they can vote out the appointment of a European Commission member. Can MPs in this country rule out a cabinet appointment? So, for example, if you took a vote in Parliament on whether or not Boris Johnson should have been Foreign Secretary and it was passed, he doesn't have to leave. So there's more democracy in Brussels. Oddly, I know this sounds odd, but if you can veto the appointment after checking the background of every commissioner, think of commissioners as ministers, then there's more democracy with Tusk and Juncker than there is with our system. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying if you really want to use democracy as this slide rule, we need to be entirely clear on how and what these elections are conducted. Good grief. 22 minutes after 11, all of which makes the question even more rhetorical. Why would you not want to have another vote now that you've seen the survey? Answer, because it's democracy, except as we demonstrated with the last fella, it's not democracy at all, because Dominic Cummings himself explained that he got lots and lots of people to believe utterly, what's the word when they would cancel each other out? There's a better word than contradictory. The word where, you know, two people can't simultaneously get what they've both voted for, even though they've both voted to leave the European Union. And that was deliberate. That's how they got over the line. You convinced 17 million people, the 17 million different Xanadu's, none of which are attainable. And even if one of them was attainable, it would be attainable only through the disappointment, the democratic disappointment of that person over there who voted for a very, very different one. And this isn't hard to understand, but as the caller just before the break demonstrated, you can pretend not to understand it, but it's very, very unconvincing. It's pretty straightforward. Here is a bloke saying we'll be like Norway. Here's a bloke saying that we'll be still in the single market. Here's another bloke saying that we won't be leaving, we won't be abandoning freedom of movement. There's three very, very different votes, all of which have been let down. How's that democracy? It's not. Damien's in Bushy. Damien, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thanks for taking the call.
Very well.
Again, first time again, and nervous and all that.
There's two Irish fellas in the last 10 minutes telling me they're nervous about getting on the programme. I can't believe it.
Well,
nullify is the word. Nullify is the word I was looking for.
I think, James, that people like me who have a little more experience. We're not smarter or anything like that, but the fact is we live in two countries.
Yes.
We are forced by need, and we're a smaller country. Ireland is a smaller country, and I come from the Republic, as you can probably tell.
Yes.
We have a little bit of a different view on this, as you can imagine. And I basically think if this referendum is not rerun, democracy is dead in the United Kingdom. Dead. And I don't mean that. I don't mean to be hyperbolic when I say that.
No.
But I can tell you, the lies, the sheer recorded lies that were told on that referendum, that at least, swung a huge amount of people into the Leave camp, were astonishing.
Yes, and the rhetoric now is to say that there were lies on both sides, but of course predictions that haven't come true are not the same as things that were lies the minute they came out of those people's mouths.
Thing is, I'm not interested in rhetoric, what I am is interested in facts, and I can give you some very good questions that I did not hear effectively asked over the referendum campaign.
Go on.
Like, for example, the European Union is a free trade bloc, i.e. you have free trade within that bloc. That's what makes it nice and buffery when you want to get things moved from Britain to France, etc., or Ireland to Bulgaria. That's what makes, and therefore we have more economic.
It's a terrible phone line, Damien. I want you to give me your headline points, but I'm only picking up about one word in three at the moment.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
That's a little better, yeah.
Anyway, it's a free trade bloc, and if you go to WTO, which is what people want, what the WP people want, the WTO required that you have a border with the free trade bloc.
Yeah, that's right.
So it would not have been Britain imposing the border, as Theresa doesn't want to do anyway. It would not be the European Union imposing the border, the WTO, which has been espoused by these people. And that's a very, very clear and simple point that has not been, debunked at all.
But I think because it's not been properly examined, as you say, and you're the second caller to make this point, and it's a powerful, powerful point, but I wonder whether it needs the referendum to be properly examined, because at the moment they can run it up a flagpole and say that it's all going to be great. Boris Johnson can say we need to believe in it. Jacob Rees-Mogg can talk unadulterated twaddle about cheap shoes. They can all kind of pretend that the unicorns... WTO is the new unicorn. It's the thing that people can say in order to persuade themselves that they haven't been sold an absolute kipper. But, of course, as you point out, the minute you start examining what those words actually mean, the whole thing falls apart. But people aren't going to examine what the words actually mean until it's realistically on the table, which is why it probably does need to be on Justine Greening's referendum question.
Well, it comes back to my point is, do you care about democracy in this country? Yeah. If you tell lies and a referendum is based on those lies, and the whole economic and social history of this country changes over the next 10 years as a result of that, and people are put into hardship.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, I'm with you. But look at America. Donald Trump elected on an absolute farrago of lies, and the damage being done to their democracy is going to take generations to fix.
Well, you had that guy. These people are a different class to you and me. You had that guy Steve Bannon on yesterday. Yeah. He's advocating an uprising. I'm from Ireland. That doesn't take much.
No, but it turns out when the bruiser, when the absolute silverback gorilla that is Theo Usherwood asked him a couple of relatively straightforward questions, he started crying. So, I mean, these are the kind of people that call for armed insurrections, and everybody needs to pick up their cudgels, and then you just sort of give him a little bit of a poke, and he starts weeping like a wet blancmange. But anyway, don't take my word for that. We'll be getting chapter and verse from Theo Usherwood in about an hour's time on very strange development. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need. Who wouldn't want another go now that, I mean, seriously, what answers have we received? The only answer to saying why we wouldn't want them, I wouldn't have wanted one a week after. I'd have said, no, let's crack on, see what happens. Seriously, we can't go through all this again. But now we've cracked on, we've seen what's happened. We've got the survey, we don't want to buy the house anymore. 03456060973. The only argument against that is the utterly bogus argument that is loosely described as the will of the people, to which you say, which people? The people who were told we could be like Norway? The people who were told we could be like Switzerland? The people who were told that freedom of movement would remain? The people who were told that the I saw my latest Daniel Hannan tweet from 2 or 3 years ago yesterday, over the course of the weekend. So something like, of all the lies, of all the Project Fear misconceptions, the worst is surely the idea that anyone would ever impose a hard border in Ireland. Yeah, well done, Daniel. Great work, mate. And still these people pop up on the telly and the radio all the time saying, essentially, you've got to believe more. You've got to believe more. I wish I could believe more. And if you give me some evidence, I will believe. But whenever they're asked to write down what they would do differently, boom. Oh, WTO. Can you explain what that means? No. No. So what I'm going to do, if anyone ever asks me to explain what the WTO means, I'm just going to keep repeating those sound bites that mean I don't have to answer the question. I'll talk about the will of the people, I'll talk about betrayal, and I'll talk about Brexit means Brexit. But don't ask me for detail, because I've got none. Theresa May's spokesman has just stated there is not going to be a second referendum under any circumstances, which I would suggest increases the likelihood of a second referendum by between 40 and 50%. And why wouldn't you want one, now that you've had a look in the box? Or do you want to buy a box without knowing what's in it? This is very popular on the internet, I'm told, by my 10-year-old daughter. It's get millions of followers on YouTube. People watch you unwrap. You think I'm making this up? Actually, the audience is now divided. It's a bit like Brexit, between people that know that what I'm saying is true because they've seen it with the evidence of their own eyes, and people who refuse to believe it because it sounds so outlandish. You have now massive crazes on YouTube for people unwrapping presents. Millions of hits and views, and takes the gloss off being the most viral radio presenter in the country, actually, thinking that I could have just sat here opening presents and probably have done even more. But that's it. That's what. So now, here's your choice. Here's a box. We will spend 6 months describing what's in it without opening it, right? And that is your Remain versus Leave. So some of the stuff that the Remain side said turns out not to be in the box after all. And they were describing it in pretty unpleasant terms. We could overcomplicate the conversation now by saying one of the main reasons why the economic hardships predicted haven't come to pass. There's 2 simple reasons why. Number one is rational actors. Economic forecasts are based on the presumption of rational actors, i.e. people understand the economy in which they're living. So a lot of the predictions, when you think that 52% of the country thought that they weren't going to take any economic hit at all, the fact that people carried on behaving as if they weren't running towards a cliff edge makes perfect sense. But the second, of course, is the policies that Mark Carney introduced the morning after the result came in to minimise precisely the predictions that he'd made. That's a cross. No wonder he's going back to Canada at the end of this contract. The man literally told us, don't do this, it will be really bad. We did it. He then moved heaven and earth to minimise the badness, and now he gets held up as a fraudster because his policies designed to minimise the economic impact of Brexit were partly successful, which proves he was lying when he described the economic impact of Brexit, which he moved heaven and earth to address. Oh, never gets cold, never gets tired. 11:36 is the time. Another piece I'd refer you to by Fintan O'Toole in the Irish press describes in very chilling terms precisely what people like Donald Trump and Steve Bannon are up to at the moment with the normalisation of fascism. The idea that when the babies are put in cages, it's not some sort of aberration. It's a test to see whether whether enough people will put up with it. Generally need 35 to 40% support to bring in fascism through democracy. And the babies in cages brought about by Jeff Sessions' April the 6th decision. And then Trump, of course, tried to pretend that it was the Democrats that had done it, which is yet more evidence of just exactly how much faith he has in his following. I'll tweet that article from my Twitter account, at Mr. James OB. It's incredibly chilling reading. 11:37 is the time. Back to the question of the second referendum. Lewis is in Bournemouth. Lewis, what would you like to say?
Well, I support the idea of a referendum. I think the country should have an opportunity to look again, considering that we've now got more information than we had 2 years ago. However, I am concerned about what happens if Remain lose, and lose by an even greater margin this time.
It'd be a relief, wouldn't it, almost? Because then we can just, all right, carry on then.
Maybe.
Off you go, chop your leg off, hop away, and I mean, I know we have to chop our leg off as well, but it would at least remove the kind of... I think 52-48 was always going to be unsatisfactory, whichever way it went. And if it was 60-40, even if it was the way that you and I don't want, at least it would remove that kind of sense of but for a few people staying in the pub instead of going to vote, it would have gone the other way.
Well, I think it's like playing cards. You know, do you stick or twist? The options being, I mean, do we just kind of hope that we can get the softest Brexit possible, or do we go for another people's vote or referendum?
But there's a choice between no legs and one leg, when in fact there's no reason why we can't keep two legs.
Well, you know, we run the risk that Leave win by an even greater majority this time. And can you imagine what it would be like, the Brexit triumphalism, you know, what the right-wing media would be like? It would
I mean, yeah, you're probably right about that, although the Daily Mail will have a new editor by then, so the vilest excesses of the right-wing media will probably have been slightly nullified. But
we'll see about that.
Well, I'm fairly confident it will be, but you're right, we'll see. No one's got a completely reliable crystal ball. But I don't know, maybe I'm being naive. In fact, I think you're suggesting that I am. Because a victory, an enhanced victory for Brexit would be an enhanced victory for ignorance and xenophobia. I think that's become absolutely clear. And like you, actually, now I come to think of it, maybe I'm being a bit optimistic when I think that the ignorance and xenophobia would somehow be neutered by a second vote. 11:40 is the time. 0345 606 0973. Mutually exclusive is better than nullify. It's because I was looking for one word. So when I talk about the fella that voted to leave because he thought that we'd be like Norway, and the fella who voted to leave because he thought that we'd be like Switzerland, and the fella who believed Daniel Hannan when he said that only an idiot would talk. Was it him or was it Owen Paterson that said that? Anyway, it doesn't matter, does it? Said that we definitely wouldn't be leaving the single market. And then you've got the fella who voted to leave because he was assured that freedom of movement wouldn't be affected. The fella that voted to leave because he was told that I'm being a bit sexist here, that's 5 fellas so far. He was told that the European Union needed us more than we need them. The woman that voted to leave because she believed that the German car industry wouldn't allow a no-deal scenario. So that's 6 different positions, all mutually exclusive, none of which is being delivered by Brexit. So who's looking out for them? Who's looking out for those leavers who are not going to get what they voted for? The debate seems to be dominated by the leavers who insist that they are getting what they voted for, but are lying, because nobody voted to be worse off, even when they say that they did. Nobody voted to see their children lose their job. Nobody voted to destroy agriculture or to destroy industry. Nobody voted to shut down car plants or to wave goodbye to Airbus. Nobody voted for any of this. But there's so much ego invested now that they have to pretend that they did. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't know how you help those people. I really don't. I do know that if you reply to one of those dodgy emails telling you that if you send 10 grand to some fella in West Africa, he'll help you liberate $10 million that has mysteriously ended up in his bank account. I do know that after you've sent the first 10 grand, the likelihood of you sending more money increases exponentially because nobody wants to admit that they've been gold. That's where we are now. A second referendum arguably gives people a chance to get their 10 grand back. Or it gives people a chance to spend another 10 grand because we just need to grease a few more palms before we get your $10 gazillion out of the oil fields of West Africa. I don't know which way it would go, actually, but it's probably worth having a look, isn't it? Craig's in Beaconsfield. Craig, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning. Am I allowed to start off with the quotation?
If you must.
You sound so enthusiastic. Because Thomas Jefferson said that a properly functioning democracy depends upon an informed electorate.
He did,
and I think
indeed.
2 years ago we were, as a nation, staggeringly ill-informed on the functioning of the European Union and the associated bodies and the impacts that it would have. I mean, you've said yourself you didn't know nearly enough to vote, and you're better informed than the vast majority of people. So I think for that reason, we do need to have a second referendum. And when it comes down to it, though, I think it's really important that it's a binary choice, because I think the way in which the Leave campaign won the first time around is that they managed to offer all things to all people. And so I think at the point where Theresa May has negotiated the best deal that she can, you would have an official Remain campaign, an official Leave campaign, but the Leave campaign would be forced to choose one of the options. Either we're going with Theresa's deal or we're going with the WTO rules, and then that would be on which they'd have
do you know
to
what? I apologise for greeting your quotation so unenthusiastically. Because it's a little bit like people ringing up and saying, "Do you mind if I read you a poem?" And but I love poems and I love quotations. It was only if you'd written the poem yourself that my unenthusiasm would have been justified. So what you do is you make the Leave side own the mutually exclusive nature of their original campaign. So the only way you ensure that they can't promise all things to all people is by pinning down what it is exactly that they're promising.
Exactly.
Oh, you're
in
very
terms
good.
of the timing, at that point, it would be necessary to pick a course of action.
Yes, no, I think that's very strong. Likelihood of it happening?
A second referendum, well, if Theresa says it's not going to happen, who knows? But
strong and stable, mate. Strong and stable.
Indeed. But it's a bit like Farage on the night of the referendum itself, when he admitted defeat effectively at 10 p.m. But he said the fight goes on. So we know for a fact that if it had been 48-52 the other way around, the people campaigning for Leave obviously would have fought harder and harder for a second vote in any case. Some
suggestions that intervention isn't quite as clear as you describe it, but of course this is not the place to examine those suggestions. I was thinking more about the plausibility of the Leave side having to pin down what it is they're offering, because you'd object furiously, wouldn't you, if you were Theresa May? How would you campaign? You don't want to campaign for the... Do you see what I mean? I don't know how you fix that fissure.
I think that Theresa May might choose to absent herself from the campaign, of saying, yes, but I'm mummy who's going to be steering the bus afterwards, so you just need to tell me if we're taking the right fork or the left fork.
Yeah.
And
that's been her problem from the start, hasn't it? Is trying to that's why she had to come out with utterly meaningless phrases like Brexit means Brexit and will of the people, because that's the only way she could pretend that the bus she was driving had everybody in the back of it that voted to leave the European Union. And it was a pretext from the very start.
And refusing to answer the hypothetical question of how she would vote if a second referendum or if a referendum were being held today, when she answers other hypothetical questions all the time.
Yes, and well, I mean, it was Ian Dale, of course, that asked her that question, and although she didn't answer it in the strictest sense of the word, I suspect she actually did. By refusing to answer it, she answered it, well, obviously this is a mad course of action, but the people have voted for it, and it's my job to deliver it. The problem is, as it gets madder and madder and madder and madder, you can't help at least wondering, and I appreciate that my exposure is a little unrealistic. I deal with more of the doff cap tug forelock, we must press ahead at all costs people than possibly anyone else in the country does. But you have to presume that a significant proportion of that 17.5 million people are bright enough to realise that they're not getting what they voted for. That's all. I'm not making any other aspersions about their intelligence or their integrity, but they must realise that they're not getting what they voted for. They can't all be embarked upon a Boris Johnson exercise in belief. I believe I still will, when they've been told that they won't. And if the Chequers deal did anything, it absolutely crystallised the fact that a significant proportion, if not every single one of those 17.5 million people, is not going to get anything that remotely resembles the Brexit that they were fallaciously and dishonestly promised. It's 11:46. We'll talk about something else in the next hour. We will also, of course, be catching up with Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, who appears to have... he appears to have outed Donald Trump's former chief strategist, the sort of tough guy of the alt-right, as what I believe people like that like to call snowflakes. Sort of practically burst into tears off-air after Theo had the audacity to ask him a couple of fairly straightforward questions about relatively simple points of law. I presume that when he came in to be interviewed on this radio station, he thought he was just going to get his tummy tickled. Well, Theo was having none of it. But the aftermath, the exchange that happened off-air between Theo Usherwood and Steve Bannon is genuinely the stuff of slapstick comedy. Who are you? I'm a really tough guy. I'm Donald Trump's chief strategist. I'm really tough. Here's Theo Usherwood. He's going to make you cry. Anyway, I've got the tape. I'll play it to you in full at about 12:30. 0345 6060973 is the number to call. I wonder if it's time to tell you the story of when Breitbart tried to sue me. I was going to save it for the book. It's 11:50. Alex is in Glasgow. Back to Brexit. Alex, what would you like to say?
You know, listening to the thrust of the conversation this morning in the past few calls, it's kind of becoming clear that Leave voters, they didn't realise it, but they were playing a kind of an elaborate extended version of the shell game. It's like you can vote for any shell you want, but we'll only reveal what one you were really voting for after the result comes in. It must be horrible.
Well, no, because, I mean, I recognise that the people who shout at me all the time are not representative of the broader tribe. But the people who shout at me all the time would deny furiously that they will say, I knew all along there'd be nothing under the shell. When I pointed at the one I thought the P was under, I knew it wouldn't be under it, and that's actually what I wanted. I wanted the shell with no P, but we digress.
Well, I mean, if you'd offered me a referendum last year, I would have said no, thank you.
So I think I would as well.
And actually, I think I do want to have one now for personal reasons. In that I feel like in the last one I was complacent.
Yeah.
And I think in Scotland we had fatigue because we had been through years of votes. So we'd had our own independence referendum in 2014. Then we had Scottish parliamentary votes the year after. Then we had this, we had the EU referendum, and then obviously we had the general election that Mrs May promised us we would absolutely not have, which might put her comments today into perspective as well.
She did, didn't she? She swore blind there'd be no general election.
She did, didn't she?
And then she called one. And what does she do today? She's sworn blind there'll be no second referendum.
Yeah.
But because it might not be called by her. It might be called by whatever carcass replaces her in the event of her being pulled to shreds by the Brexit shenanigans. Holy maloli. So go on, what else would favour you towards another?
At this point, with a bit of distance from the last one, and not having been on a kind of 4-year run of votes, I would personally, I would campaign. Depending on what was on the paper.
I think I would as well this time.
Yeah, I would get out and campaign.
But I might even start accepting some of those invitations to appear on dreadful BBC programmes hosted by other people.
Oh my goodness, get on them.
I know, mate, seriously.
The other thing I think is that, and you might disagree with this, but I think we have a moral obligation to have another referendum.
Yes, I don't disagree with you at all.
On the basis of how David Cameron set the franchise last time.
Yeah.
So David Cameron took the choice that 16-year-olds couldn't vote because he set the franchise as the same as the parliamentary elections, the UK ones.
Yeah.
Now, they've sat for 2 years watching this unfold. I think your analogy of an unboxing is quite appropriate. So they've watched the 15, 16, 17-year-olds unbox this for 2 years.
Yeah.
They must be horrified.
Yeah. Yeah, you told us there was going to be all sorts in those boxes, and you
Absolutely.
know,
it was a facehugger from Alien.
Well, they're not just empty. Yeah, exactly that. They're not just empty. They've got boxing gloves on springs in them.
Absolutely. And now they're 18, so they do meet the franchise. So it's not a matter of then resetting the franchise.
I mean, you make a bunch of very, very powerful points. Hand on heart, what do you think is going to happen?
I think what's going to happen is that it'll all get fudged, sadly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say it.
Yeah.
My wife is Finnish.
They'll muddle something through. But you've got the ERG aren't going to let it go, and then you've got the Remainers who aren't going to let it go. Then you've got some Leavers. Well, ERG are Leavers. I mean, I mean, this is the first time since it all started where I don't have a clear view on what I think will happen next, which is actually quite refreshing. And also, it protects me from the thing of being predicting something that I don't want to happen and then being proved right again. But I don't know what's going to happen next. I think I lean towards, unlike you, Alex, I lean towards the idea that there probably will have to be a second vote because we are a democracy. And ultimately, however furiously people insist that they voted for what they're getting, the evidence is that they didn't. It is incontrovertible fact. That, I mean, should we just have a listen to some of those David Davis things that he said in the run-up? Have we got anything there handy? If you think that this key campaigner who insisted severally that we could do X, Y, and Z, talking, what have we got on him? Kind of, yeah, here you go. Clip 3 I like a lot, because this is David Davis, right? This isn't some fag packet fascist or some sort of no-mark local campaigner or the lovely bloke in red trousers at Wells Next the Sea who told me a fortnight before the referendum vote that Ireland was nothing to worry about at all, old boy. This is David Davis, the recently departed Secretary of State for exiting the European Union.
We'd be better off in terms of global trade. We could do better trade deals than the European Union does on our behalf. We would not lose anything in terms of our access to European markets, because apart from anything else, the German car industry alone would have a 16 billion market put at risk. And Merkel, any German politician would not be able to allow that. So there's a very easy, not easy, but a very straightforward negotiation.
Do you think we would get all the advantages of the single market for we would pay no price for that access?
No, I think the only area where that won't work is on agriculture, where we'd have to have some particular deal. We'd have to subsidise British farming in a free market position. But other than that, it's pretty clear that the end game would be a free market arrangement.
So the thing there, and this is for me a real pivot point, this is an oyster shucker. That isn't true. And what if you voted for that because you believed David Davis? It's not a trick question. It's not one of my clever sophistry techniques. It's a simple, okay, I heard that interview. I like it. Was that Andrew Neil doing the interview? I think it was. Andrew Neil, the Don. He's made the point. David Davis has brushed them away. I would probably lean more towards Andrew Neil's analysis than David Davis's. But of course, Andrew Neil is chairman of the company that publishes The Spectator, which came out for Brexit. So possibly, arguably, he could have gone in even harder. I voted Leave because I believed you, David Davis, on that. I'm going to play it again, actually, because I don't think you've got anything to be embarrassed or ashamed about. If you voted to leave because you believed David Davis when he said... No, I don't need to play it again. When he said all of that stuff about not losing any access to the single market, about the German car industry. This is the point I was making to the fellow earlier who had to pretend he didn't understand what I was saying, because he did all too well. That man there got votes as a result of his campaigning. And the stuff he said while campaigning was not true. At the very least, you could say, to be kind, it hasn't come true. I'm not kind. I know it wasn't true when he actually said it. But if you voted for him because of that, how can you now not want another bite of the cherry, given that the reason why you voted has turned out not to be true? That's it. So the will of the people, which people? And then you get a small queue of people who will insist they knew full well that David Davis was lying, and they voted for him because they knew he was lying. OK. What's the other line that you get sometimes? And you full well what I was voting for. I was voting to be poorer. I was voting to see my job potentially disappear. You didn't, you silly old fibber. Honestly. Ben's in Seoul in South Korea. I say, I wasn't expecting that. Ben, what would you like to say?
All right. James, I agree with the last caller in the sense that the original Remain campaign was quite complacent.
Yes.
But I think the complacency is also creeping in now.
Do you?
Because I think we're talking about a second referendum. But even if we do hold and hopefully there will be a second referendum. But first, we've got to secure a guarantee that Article 50 can be actually revoked, and under what conditions?
Because there's no point having a massive nationwide vote to call it all off if we can't. Well, Lord Kerr, who wrote it, Lord Kerr wrote Article 50, and he tells me that we can revoke it.
But if you read the European Parliament's report, it states explicitly that it can't be.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
Well, it says because, if you read into it, it says because otherwise, if Article 50 could be unilaterally revoked, then it would be a big weakness.
I think you've misunderstood this, but I'm only 50-50, so I'll explain what I think the situation is, all right? Because I could be wrong, and I certainly don't want to insult you. But as I understand it, Article 50 was only ever envisioned as being triggered by the European Union to get rid of a member state that had, for example, gone too far down the path towards fascism or autocracy. So the report that you're referring to is not describing the scenario in which the United Kingdom finds itself, which is unprecedented, given that the man who wrote Article 50 explained to me and my listeners about 3 months ago that no one ever thought it would be used like this. No one ever thought they'd use it to get out. We only ever thought we'd use it to get rid. Do you see?
But
so when he says, the man that wrote it says he thinks that we could unilaterally revoke it, it should give us both a little bit of comfort.
I understand, but first off, Lord Kerr he's not a lawyer, and there's not actually anything in Article 50 itself about revocation.
Well,
the actual European Parliament study was the irrevocability of the withdrawal of notification under Article 50.
Well, then we can agree then on that and say absolutely it needs to be specified. I would suggest that the public comments by the likes of Donald Tusk suggest that he would very much welcome it. But you're right, we need to establish formally and without doubt that it can indeed be revoked, because you're perfectly right. It's Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, and if we can't revoke it, there's no point having another referendum. It's 12 noon.